I never thought I'd end up in a criminal courtroom over a snow shovel. But here I am, watching my HOA president squirm in the defendant's chair while a prosecutor grips the very shovel that started this whole mess. My name is William Harper, and I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Aurora, Colorado for the past 6 years. It's one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where every house looks almost identical. The lawns are manicured to perfection, and the HOA rules are thicker than the Bible. When I first moved in, I thought the strict guidelines would help maintain property values. I had no idea I was walking into a nightmare ruled by one particular woman who took her position as HOA president more seriously than the Secret Service protects the president. That woman's name is Patricia Blackwell, though everyone in the neighborhood had started calling her something else behind her back. Patricia was 53 years old, stood about 5'6", and had that distinctive haircut you see in every meme about difficult middle-aged women. You know the one. Short, layered with blonde highlights that she got touched up every 3 weeks like clockwork at the salon on Havana Street. She wore pantsuits everywhere, even to check her mailbox, and she had this way of pursing her lips when she was about to tell you that you'd violated some obscure HOA rule that nobody even knew existed. The snow shovel incident happened on a Tuesday morning in January, right after one of those massive Colorado snowstorms that dumps 2 feet of powder overnight and shuts down half the city. I had woken up at 5 in the morning to start clearing my driveway before heading to work. I'm a software engineer at a tech company in the Denver Tech Center, and we had an important client meeting scheduled that I couldn't miss, even with the weather. I grabbed my snow shovel from where I always kept it, leaning against the wall in my garage, and got to work. The shovel was nothing fancy, just a standard metal blade with an ergonomic handle that I'd bought from Home Depot 3 winters ago. But it was mine. I'd paid for it, and more importantly, my back had gotten used to its weight and balance. Anyone who's ever shoveled heavy, wet snow knows that having a shovel you're comfortable with makes all the difference. By 6:30, I had cleared my driveway and was sweating despite the 20-degree temperature. I went inside to shower and change, leaving the shovel leaning against my garage door like always. My house was at 7643 Meadowbrook Circle, right on the corner where the street curved around toward the community park. It was a good location, quiet, with mature trees that provided shade in the summer. When I came back outside 45 minutes later, dressed in my work clothes and carrying my laptop bag, the shovel was gone, just completely vanished. I stood there in my driveway, looking at the exact spot where I'd left it, thinking maybe I'd put it somewhere else and forgotten. But no, I had a very clear memory of leaning it right there against the white garage door, next to the motion sensor light. I checked inside the garage, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly put it away, but it wasn't there. I walked around my property, checking the side yard and the back patio, but nothing. The shovel had simply disappeared in the 45 minutes I'd been inside. Now, I'm generally a pretty rational guy. I don't jump to conclusions. My first thought was that maybe one of my neighbors had borrowed it because theirs had broken or something. It wouldn't be the first time someone in the neighborhood had borrowed a tool without asking. Just last summer, my hedge trimmer had mysteriously vanished for 3 days before showing up back in my garage with a note that said, "Thanks, Tom from 7651. I'd never even gotten a chance to tell Tom that it was fine, just please ask next time. But this felt different. It was barely 7 in the morning, still dark outside, and most of my neighbors were probably just waking up. Who would come over and take a shovel in the pre-dawn darkness without knocking on the door first? I didn't have time to investigate right then, because I was already running late. I carefully navigated my car out of the driveway, cursing the missing shovel because I hadn't been able to clear the last bit near the street, and headed to work. The roads were a mess, and what should have been a 30-minute commute took me an hour and 20 minutes. All day at work, the missing shovel nagged at me. It wasn't about the $20 value of the thing. It was the principle. Someone had come onto my property and taken something that belonged to me without permission. That's theft, plain and simple, regardless of how cheap the item was. I got home around 6 that evening, after stopping at the Ace Hardware on Smoky Hill Road to buy a new shovel. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Patricia's black Lexus SUV parked in front of the community mailboxes. She was standing there talking to elderly Mrs. Henderson from 7698, and even from my car, I could see Patricia's animated hand gestures. She was probably complaining about something again. That woman could find a problem with a rainbow. I grabbed my new shovel and my laptop bag and headed into my house, making a mental note to check with my other neighbors about the missing shovel later. But as I walked up my front path, I noticed something. On the concrete, there were these faint scratches, like something metal had been dragged across it. The scratches led from my garage door across my driveway and toward the street. Interesting, I thought. I followed the scratches with my eyes and noticed they continued on the sidewalk, heading in the direction of the HOA office. Our neighborhood had a small office building near the entrance gate where the HOA conducted business, held meetings, and stored various community maintenance equipment. Patricia practically lived there, spending hours each day organizing, filing, and finding new ways to make everyone's lives difficult. A theory started forming in my mind, but it seemed too ridiculous to be true. Why would the HOA president steal my snow shovel? She had access to all the community equipment. There were probably a dozen shovels in the HOA storage shed. It didn't make sense. I went inside and made myself dinner, but I couldn't let it go. After eating, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The evening was cold and clear, the kind of crisp winter night where your breath creates clouds and the snow crunches satisfyingly under your boots. I walked past several houses, waving to a few neighbors who were out clearing the last of the snow from their walkways. When I reached the HOA office, I noticed the lights were still on inside. Through the window, I could see Patricia sitting at the desk, typing away at her computer. And then I saw it. Leaning against the wall right behind her desk was a snow shovel, my snow shovel. I recognized it immediately because of a small dent near the blade that had happened when I'd accidentally hit a raised sprinkler head last winter. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring through the window, trying to process what I was seeing. The HOA president had actually stolen my shovel. But why? What possible reason could she have? I walked up to the office door and tried the handle. Locked. I knocked firmly, and Patricia looked up from her computer with an expression of annoyance. She stood up, smoothed down her navy pantsuit, and came to the door. She opened it just a crack, not enough for me to step inside. "Yes, William. It's after office hours. If you have an HOA concern, please submit it in writing through the proper channels," she said in that clipped, officious tone she used when she wanted to remind everyone of her authority. "Patricia, that shovel behind your desk, that's mine. I left it outside my garage this morning and it disappeared. I need it back," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. Her face changed then, going from annoyed to defensive in a split second. "I don't know what you're talking about. This shovel belongs to the HOA. It's community property." "No, it's not. Look at the handle. See that green tape wrapped around it? I put that there last year to improve the grip. And there's a dent on the blade. That's my personal shovel from my personal property." Patricia's mouth pressed into that thin line I'd seen so many times before. The HOA has every right to confiscate items that violate community standards. Your shovel was left in visible view from the street, which violates Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the community bylaws. No maintenance equipment may be stored in a manner visible from public thoroughfares. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. Are you serious right now? I used the shovel to clear my driveway and left it there for 45 minutes while I got ready for work. That's not storage. That's active use. And even if it was a violation, which it isn't, the HOA doesn't have the right to confiscate personal property. That's called theft, Patricia. I prefer to think of it as enforcement, she said coldly. If you have an issue with HOA policies, you're welcome to attend the next board meeting and voice your concerns. Good evening, William. She started to close the door, but I put my hand on it. I want my shovel back, tonight, or I'm calling the police. Patricia's eyes went wide, and then she actually smiled, which was somehow worse than her angry face. Go ahead and call them. I'd love to see you explain to Aurora PD that you're bothering them about a $20 shovel. They'll laugh you out of the station. Now remove your hand from HOA property before I call them myself and report you for trespassing. I removed my hand, more out of shock than compliance. She shut the door in my face and went back to her desk, pointedly ignoring me. I could see her typing again, probably documenting this encounter in whatever meticulous record she kept. I walked back home, furious but also confused. Patricia had always been strict and unreasonable, but this was next-level crazy. Taking someone's personal property, and then claiming it was HOA enforcement. And her attitude suggested she thought she was completely in the right, that her position as HOA president gave her some kind of authority to do whatever she wanted. When I got home, I did something I'd been meaning to do for months, but had never gotten around to. I pulled up the website for my home security camera system. I'd installed cameras last summer after there had been a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. I had one camera pointing at my front door, one at the back door, and one in the garage that covered the driveway. The garage camera had a wide-angle lens and motion activation. If someone had taken my shovel, it would have been caught on camera. I logged into the app on my laptop and pulled up the footage from that morning. I fast-forwarded through the recording of me shoveling the driveway, watching myself in triple speed clearing the snow, and then going into the house. The timestamp showed 6:32 a.m. when I went inside. At 6:58 a.m., a figure appeared in the frame. Even in the early morning darkness, the camera's night vision mode captured everything perfectly. It was Patricia, wearing a long black coat and those expensive boots she always wore. She looked around, checking to see if anyone was watching, and then walked straight up to my garage. She grabbed my shovel, turned around, and walked away with it, right back toward the street. I sat back in my chair, absolutely stunned. I had it all on video, clear as day. The HOA president, caught red-handed stealing my property. The timestamp, her face, everything was perfectly visible. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or borrowing. This was deliberate theft. I downloaded the video file to my computer and then backed it up to 3 different locations: the cloud, a USB drive, and an external hard drive. Something told me this footage was going to be important. The next morning, I got up early and went straight to the Aurora Police Department station on East Alameda Avenue. It was a modern building, all brick and glass, with a parking lot that was already half full even though it was only 7 a.m. I walked inside, approached the front desk, and told the officer on duty that I needed to file a police report for theft. The officer, whose name tag read Martinez, handed me a clipboard with forms. "What was stolen, sir?" "A snow shovel, but I have video evidence of who took it." Officer Martinez's expression suggested he thought this was going to be a waste of time, but he remained professional. "Fill out these forms and an officer will be with you shortly." I sat in the waiting area and filled out everything, describing the incident in detail. 20 minutes later, a detective named Sarah Wells came out to meet me. She was in her early 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen it all. "Mr. Harper, I understand you want to report a theft." "Yes, madam. My HOA president stole my snow shovel yesterday morning, and I have her on camera doing it." Detective Wells raised an eyebrow. "Your HOA president?" "I know it sounds bizarre, but yes. She took it from my property without permission, and when I confronted her about it, she claimed it was HOA enforcement, but it's clearly theft. I have video evidence." Something in my tone must have convinced her I was serious because she nodded and led me to a small interview room. I pulled out my laptop and showed her the footage. We watched it together, Patricia's nighttime theft playing out in crisp detail. "That's definitely theft," Detective Wells said after watching it twice. "HOA or not, she has no legal authority to take your personal property." "Do you know her full name and address?" "Patricia Blackwell. She lives at 7721 Meadowbrook Circle, same neighborhood as me." Detective Wells took notes. "And the value of the shovel, about $20. I know it's not much, but it's the principle. She thinks she can do whatever she wants because she's the HOA president." "I understand completely. Actually, we've had a few other complaints about HOA overreach in Aurora lately. It's becoming a problem. Let me make a copy of this video and we'll go have a chat with Miss Blackwell." The satisfaction I felt hearing those words was immense. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. I provided Detective Wells with a copy of the video on a USB drive, gave her my contact information, and left the station feeling vindicated. I went to work, and for the first time in 2 days, I was able to focus on my job instead of obsessing about the shovel. My coworker, James, noticed my improved mood at lunch. "You seem happy today. What's up?" he asked as we ate sandwiches in the break room. I told him the whole story, and James, who had his own HOA horror stories from his neighborhood in Centennial, was appropriately outraged on my behalf. "Dude, that's insane. I mean, my HOA once fined me because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours, but they've never actually stolen anything from me. You think the cops will actually do something? I hope so. I mean, it's clearly theft. It's on video. What more evidence do they need?" That afternoon, while I was in a meeting about a software update, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and checked it when the meeting ended. It was Detective Wells. "Mr. Harper, this is Detective Wells from Aurora PD. I wanted to update you on your case. We visited Miss Blackwell this afternoon and showed her the video evidence. She initially denied it, but when confronted with the footage, she admitted to taking your shovel. However, she's maintaining that it was legitimate HOA enforcement. We've explained to her that it constitutes theft regardless of her position in the HOA. We've recovered your shovel, and you can pick it up at the station at your convenience. Miss Blackwell has been issued a citation for petty theft. She'll need to appear in court. Give me a call back if you have any questions." I actually pumped my fist in the air right there in the office hallway. A couple of people walking by gave me strange looks, but I didn't care. Justice was being served. Patricia Blackwell was being held accountable for her actions. I called Detective Wells back immediately. "Thank you so much for handling this. Can I ask what happens now?" "She'll receive a court date in the mail. For petty theft, she'll likely get a fine and possibly probation. If you want to pursue civil damages, that's separate from the criminal case. Also, I should mention that while we were at her office, we noticed several other items that appeared to be personal property. She claims they are all HOA confiscations. You might want to let your neighbors know. If any of them recognize their property, they should contact us. This was getting better and better. I absolutely will. Thank you again, Detective. I drove to the police station after work and picked up my shovel. It felt ridiculous, signing paperwork to retrieve a $20 snow shovel from police evidence, but seeing it in my hands again was satisfying. I took it home and, rather than putting it in the garage, I left it prominently displayed on my front porch. Let Patricia see it and know that her little power play had failed. That evening, I sent out an email to the neighborhood listserv. Our community had an email group where people shared information about lost pets, recommended contractors, and complained about stuff. I kept my message simple and factual. Hi, neighbors. This is William Harper from 7643 Meadowbrook Circle. Yesterday morning, my snow shovel was taken from my property without permission. I have security camera footage showing that Patricia Blackwell, our HOA president, took it. I filed a police report, and she has been cited for theft. The police mentioned that there are other items in the HOA office that appear to be personal property that was confiscated. If you're missing anything, you might want to check there and contact the Aurora police if you find your property. Best regards, William. I hit send and waited. Within 5 minutes, my phone started blowing up with responses. Apparently, I wasn't the only person who'd had items mysteriously disappear. Tom from 7651, the same guy who'd borrowed my hedge trimmer, wrote, "My garden hose disappeared last July. I thought I just misplaced it. Now I'm wondering." Margaret from 7688 chimed in. "My decorative flag went missing in October. The one I had on my porch with the fall leaves. I never found it." David from 7655 wrote, "I had a welcome mat disappear. Patricia told me it violated the community standards for approved outdoor decorations. I thought she was just giving me a warning, but now I'm wondering if she actually took it." The emails kept coming. More than a dozen people reported missing items, everything from plant pots to outdoor thermometers to a doorbell camera that someone had temporarily taken down to charge. Patricia had apparently been conducting her own personal enforcement campaign for months, maybe even years, taking people's property whenever she decided it violated some HOA rule. The next morning, there was a line of people at the Aurora Police Department, all Meadowbrook Estates residents, all asking to file police reports. I know this because several people emailed me updates. The police went to the HOA office with a warrant and photographed everything inside. The pictures that later circulated around the neighborhood showed a storage room that looked like a hoarder's paradise, shelves stacked with confiscated items, each one tagged with an address and a violation code. Within a week, Patricia Blackwell was facing not one but 17 separate counts of theft. The story made it to the local news. A reporter from 9 News came out to interview me and several other neighbors. We all stood in front of the Meadowbrook Estates entrance sign while the reporter, a young woman named Jessica Cole, asked us about living under Patricia's reign of terror. "She acted like she owned the whole neighborhood," Margaret said on camera. "Like our property was her property, and she could do whatever she wanted with it." The news segment aired that evening, and suddenly our little neighborhood drama was the talk of Aurora. The story got picked up by other local stations, and then a few national websites ran articles about it. "HOA president arrested for stealing neighbor's property" was the headline on one. Another read when HOA power goes too far. Criminal charges filed. Patricia tried to defend herself. She gave an interview to the Aurora Sentinel, where she claimed she was just trying to maintain community standards and that everyone was overreacting. These people agreed to follow HOA rules when they bought their homes, she was quoted as saying. If they can't follow simple guidelines, there have to be consequences. But her argument fell flat when the newspaper's legal expert pointed out that confiscating personal property without due process was illegal, regardless of HOA rules. The HOA can fine residents for violations, the expert explained. They can even place liens on homes for unpaid fines, but they cannot take personal property. That's theft, plain and simple. The court date arrived in March. By then, winter had turned to early spring, and the snow that had started this whole mess was long gone, replaced by the brown grass and mud of Colorado's transitional season. I took a personal day from work to attend the hearing. I wasn't required to be there since the state was prosecuting the case, but I wanted to see it through to the end. The Arapahoe County Courthouse downtown was imposing, all stone and columns, the kind of building designed to remind you of the weight of justice. I went through security, found the right courtroom, and took a seat in the gallery. Several of my neighbors were there too, all of us united in our desire to see Patricia held accountable. Patricia arrived with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in a gray suit who probably wished he was working on literally any other case. Patricia was wearing one of her pantsuits, this one black, and she had her hair freshly styled. She looked composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judith Morrison. She had silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and an expression that suggested she had zero patience for nonsense. The prosecutor, a young man named Ryan Chen, laid out the case methodically. Video evidence of Patricia taking my shovel. Testimony from the detective about finding numerous other stolen items. Statements from 17 different residents about their missing property. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and had genuinely believed she had the authority to confiscate items that violated community rules. My client was overzealous, yes, but her intentions were to maintain the community standards that all residents agreed to uphold. Judge Morrison peered over her glasses at Patricia. Miss Blackwell, did you at any point contact any of these residents before taking their property? Did you issue formal warnings? Did you follow your own HOA procedures for violations? Patricia's lawyer whispered something to her, and she stood. No, Your Honor, I did not. I felt immediate action was necessary to maintain standards. So you took it upon yourself to take other people's property without permission, without warning, and without following your own organization's procedures. I was trying to do my job as HOA president. Your job is to enforce rules, not to steal property, Judge Morrison said sharply. This court does not look favorably on abuse of authority, regardless of the context. Miss Blackwell, how do you plead to the charges? The lawyer whispered to Patricia again, and she looked like she wanted to argue, but finally she said, No contest, Your Honor. Judge Morrison nodded. Very well. The court finds you guilty on 17 counts of petty theft. You are sentenced to 30 days in jail, suspended, 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and you are ordered to pay restitution to all victims for their property plus court costs. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding any position in any homeowners association in the state of Colorado. Do you understand this sentence? Patricia's face had gone pale. Your Honor, I have a job. I have responsibilities. You should have considered that, before you decided to steal from your neighbors. This sentence is lenient given the number of offenses. Consider yourself fortunate that I'm suspending the jail time. One more thing, if you violate your probation in any way, you'll serve the full 30 days. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Patricia Blackwell, the woman who'd terrorized Meadowbrook Estates for years with her petty enforcement and power trips, had been brought down by a snow shovel and a security camera. In the hallway outside the courtroom, several of my neighbors came up to thank me. "If you hadn't pushed this, she would have gotten away with it," Tom said, shaking my hand. Margaret hugged me. "You did something we all wanted to do but were too afraid to try." I felt good about it, but I also felt a little sad. Not for Patricia. She'd earned everything she got. But sad that it had come to this, that someone had let a tiny bit of authority go so completely to their head that they'd ended up with a criminal record. The aftermath played out over the following weeks. Patricia resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. We held an emergency election, and a much more reasonable woman named Carol Stevens was voted in as the new president. Carol's first act was to review all the HOA bylaws and eliminate the most ridiculous rules, including the one about maintenance equipment being visible from the street. All the confiscated items were returned to their rightful owners. Some people had moved away and couldn't be contacted, so those items were donated to Goodwill. The news coverage had painted such a negative picture of HOAs in general that our neighborhood actually saw an increase in residents attending board meetings. Everyone suddenly interested in making sure we didn't end up with another Patricia. As for me, I got my 15 minutes of fame. The story of the stolen snow shovel became a kind of local legend in Aurora. People recognized me at the grocery store. Someone even created a meme about it that went semi-viral on social media, a picture of a snow shovel with the caption, "Don't let your HOA steal this." It was simultaneously embarrassing and hilarious, but the best part came about 6 months later in September. I was outside trimming my bushes one Saturday morning when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, mid-30s, looking at houses in the neighborhood. They walked up to me. "Excuse me," the man said. "We're thinking about buying a house here. Are you William Harper?" I admitted I was, wondering where this was going. "You're the guy with the snow shovel," the woman said, smiling. "The one who took on the crazy HOA president. That's me," I said. "Good," the man said. "We heard about it. That's actually why we're interested in this neighborhood. We figured if the residents here were willing to stand up to an abusive HOA, it's probably a pretty good place to live. Plus, we heard you guys elected a new board that's way more reasonable." I ended up giving them an impromptu tour of the neighborhood, introducing them to several neighbors, and answering all their questions about living in Meadowbrook Estates. They ended up buying a house 3 streets over from mine. At the closing, they gave me a gift, a brand new snow shovel with a plaque attached to the handle that read, "The shovel heard round the HOA." It still sits in my garage, right next to my original shovel. I never use it. It's a conversation piece now, a reminder of the time I accidentally became a symbol of standing up to petty tyranny. Patricia, meanwhile, completed her community service hours at a homeless shelter downtown. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that it was a humbling experience for her, though I never spoke to her directly again. She eventually moved out of Meadowbrook Estates, selling her house and relocating somewhere in the Denver area. Nobody kept in touch with her. It was like she'd never existed, except for the cautionary tale she left behind, the criminal record, though, that followed her forever. Colorado has public records, and anyone searching her name online would find the theft convictions. I didn't take pleasure in that. Well, maybe a little. But mostly, I just felt relieved that the nightmare was over. Living in Meadowbrook Estates became genuinely pleasant after Patricia left. Carol Stevens proved to be an excellent HOA president, actually listening to residents' concerns and focusing on real issues like maintaining the common areas, organizing community events, and keeping the budget transparent. The neighborhood thrived. Property values went up. People were friendlier. It turned out that when you didn't have someone constantly looking for violations and threatening fines, people actually enjoyed living there. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's over something as seemingly trivial as a snow shovel. I learned that authority without accountability breeds abuse, whether it's in government, business, or a suburban HOA. And I learned the value of security cameras. Those things paid for themselves 100 times over. The following winter, when the first big snowstorm hit Aurora, I was ready. I grabbed my original shovel, the one with the green tape and the dent, and cleared my driveway. This time, though, I left it leaning against my garage door with complete confidence. Carol had sent out an email reminding everyone that as long as equipment was being actively used, it was fine to leave it visible. Common sense had returned to Meadowbrook Estates. As I finished shoveling, Tom came over with his coffee, standing at the edge of my driveway. "Morning, William. Got your shovel safe and sound, I see." "Yep, this time nobody's taking it." "You know, I was thinking," Tom said, "we should put up a little memorial or something, a plaque at the entrance. In memory of common sense lost but found again, thanks to a snow shovel." I laughed. "That might be a bit much." "Yeah, you're probably right. But seriously, man, thank you. You changed this neighborhood for the better." After Tom went back to his house, I stood in my driveway for a moment, looking around at the quiet snow-covered street. The sun was coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few early risers were out walking their dogs. It looked like a postcard of suburban America. But I knew now that beneath the surface of places like this, there could be problems. People who took power too far. Rules that went from helpful to harmful. The trick was staying vigilant, staying involved, and being willing to stand up when something wasn't right, even if it made you unpopular, even if it seemed too small to matter. A snow shovel had been my line in the sand. For someone else, it might be something different. But everyone has a line, and everyone should be prepared to defend it. I put my shovel back in the garage, satisfied. Inside my house, I poured myself a cup of coffee and pulled up the neighborhood listserv on my laptop. There was a thread going about organizing a spring cleanup of the common areas. People were volunteering, sharing ideas, working together. Carol had posted a budget breakdown showing exactly where HOA fees were going. Everything was transparent and democratic. This was what an HOA was supposed to be. Not a dictatorship run by someone on a power trip, but a community organization focused on making the neighborhood better for everyone. It had taken a theft, a police investigation, and a court case to get here, but we'd made it. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom, who lived in Nebraska. She'd seen one of the news articles about the case. "So proud of you for standing up for yourself. That woman sounds terrible. Love you." I texted back a thanks and a heart emoji. My mom had always taught me to pick my battles, but to never back down from the ones that mattered. The snow shovel might have seemed like a weird hill to die on, but it represented something bigger. It was about respect, property rights, and not letting bullies win just because they had a title. The criminal charges against Patricia had been the perfect ending to the saga. Some people had asked me if I felt bad about her getting a criminal record over a shovel. The answer was no. She'd stolen from 17 people. She'd abused her position for years. She'd made people feel unsafe in their own homes. The shovel was just the thing that finally brought her down, but the pattern of behavior was what really mattered. Plus, if I'm being honest, there was something deeply satisfying about watching her face in that courtroom when the judge handed down the sentence. The shock, the disbelief, the realization that she wasn't above the law just because she was HOA president. That moment was worth every minute I'd spent dealing with the police reports and court appearances. Over the next few months, several other people in Aurora reached out to me. They'd seen the news coverage and were dealing with their own HOA problems. I became an accidental expert on homeowner association disputes, offering advice on everything from understanding bylaws to documenting violations to knowing when to get lawyers or police involved. One woman named Diana Green from a neighborhood in Stapleton, Central Park, they'd renamed it, was dealing with an HOA that was trying to fine her $10,000 because her house numbers were the wrong font. I helped her understand that while HOAs could enforce certain standards, the fines had to be reasonable and proportional. She fought it and won. A man named Victor Hendricks from Highlands Ranch had an HOA president who was embezzling dues to fund personal vacations. I advised him to document everything and report it to both the state regulatory board and the police. Last I heard, that HOA president was facing fraud charges. It turned out that Patricia wasn't unique. There were petty tyrants in HOAs all over the Denver metro area, all over Colorado, probably all over the country. People who got a little authority and let it consume them. My case had shone a light on the problem, and now others felt empowered to fight back. A local law firm even contacted me about being an expert witness in HOA disputes. I politely declined. I was a software engineer, not a legal expert, and I'd already spent enough time in courtrooms. But I appreciated that they thought I had something valuable to contribute. The months rolled into a year, and then 2 years. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully. Carol Stevens remained HOA president, running unopposed in the next election because everyone was happy with how she was doing things. We had neighborhood barbecues in the summer, a Halloween party where kids could trick or treat safely, and a holiday lights contest in December that was actually fun instead of stressful. I dated a woman named Rachel for about 8 months. She was a teacher at an elementary school in Aurora, and we met at a coffee shop on Southlands Mall. When I told her the snow shovel story on our second date, she laughed so hard she snorted coffee out her nose. We didn't work out long-term different life goals, but we remained friends. Work continued to go well. I got promoted to senior software engineer, which came with a nice raise and more interesting projects. I used some of the extra money to upgrade my house, new appliances, fresh paint, and a really nice deck in the backyard where I could sit with a beer and watch the sunset over the Rockies. The shovel, both the original and the memorial one, remained in my garage. I used the original one every winter and occasionally looked at the memorial one and smiled. It represented something important to me now, not just the specific incident, but the idea that ordinary people could push back against unfairness and win. Every now and then, someone new would move into the neighborhood and eventually hear the story. They'd come knock on my door, curious, wanting to hear it firsthand. I'd invite them in, make coffee, or offer a beer depending on the time of day, and tell them the whole saga. It never got old, seeing their expressions change from amused to shocked to satisfied, as I described Patricia's downfall. One of these people was a journalist named Marcus, who was writing a book about HOA horror stories across America. He interviewed me for 3 hours, recording everything, and asked if he could use my real name and details in the book. I agreed, figuring the story was already public knowledge anyway. When the book came out a year later, titled Suburban Tyranny, When HOAs Go Too Far, my chapter was prominently featured. The book did pretty well, ending up on a few bestseller lists, and I got more minor fame from it. Marcus sent me a signed copy with a note that said, "Thanks for your courage in standing up to the madness. Your story exemplifies everything wrong with unchecked HOA power." I put the book on my shelf next to my technical manuals and fantasy novels, an odd addition to my collection but a meaningful one. As time passed, the story became part of the neighborhood's identity. New residents were told about it as part of the informal orientation to Meadowbrook Estates. We used to have this crazy HOA president, but one of our neighbors stood up to her, and now things are great. It set the tone, letting people know that this was a community that valued fairness and common sense. Property values in our neighborhood actually went up more than comparable areas, and real estate agents started using our story as a selling point. This HOA has gone through a reformation and is now one of the most resident-friendly in Aurora. It was weird to think that my stolen shovel had inadvertently made everyone's houses more valuable, but that seemed to be the case. The security camera footage that had started everything remained on my computer, backed up and stored safely. A few times over the years, I rewatched it, still amazed at the audacity of Patricia walking right up to my garage and taking my shovel like she owned it. The camera had been worth every penny of its $200 cost. I ended up upgrading my security system actually, adding more cameras and better resolution. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd seen how useful video evidence could be. Plus, it gave me peace of mind when I traveled for work or vacation. I could check my phone and see that everything at home was fine. Speaking of travel, the story had opened up some unexpected opportunities. I was invited to speak at a conference about property rights and HOA governance in Las Vegas. They paid for my travel and gave me a small speaking fee. It was surreal, standing in front of 200 people talking about my stolen snow shovel, but the audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions afterward. I also did a podcast interview about the experience. The podcast was called Neighborhood Nightmares, and they covered all kinds of disputes between neighbors, HOA, and community organizations. My episode got more downloads than any other that season, apparently. People loved a story where the little guy won. Throughout all of this, I remained just a regular person living a regular life. I went to work, hung out with friends, watched Broncos games on Sundays, and occasionally drove up to the mountains for hiking or skiing. The snow shovel incident was a part of my life, but it didn't define me. I was still just William Harper, software engineer, Colorado resident, guy who once had his shovel stolen by his HOA president. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't change me in some ways. I was more aware now of power dynamics, more willing to question authority when it seemed wrong, more confident in standing up for myself and others. The experience had taught me that sometimes fighting back worked, that documentation mattered, and that the legal system, while imperfect, could deliver justice. I also became more involved in local community issues beyond just the HOA. I attended city council meetings occasionally, voted in every election including the local ones that most people ignored, and generally tried to be a more engaged citizen. If my shovel story had taught me anything, it was that small actions could have big consequences, and that staying silent in the face of injustice only made things worse. Years after the incident, I ran into Detective Wells at a coffee shop downtown. She recognized me immediately. William Harper. The snow shovel guy. How are you doing? We chatted for a few minutes, catching up. She told me that the case had become something of a legend at the police department, a reminder that sometimes the small cases were just as important as the big ones. You know what I remember most about that case? She said, it wasn't the theft itself. It was your determination to see it through. A lot of people would have just let it go, bought a new shovel, moved on, but you insisted on accountability. That matters. Her words meant a lot to me. Law enforcement dealt with real crimes every day, violent offenses and serious matters. It would have been easy for them to dismiss a stolen shovel as too petty to bother with. But they'd taken it seriously, followed through, and helped deliver justice. That said something good about the Aurora Police Department. As I drove home that day, I thought about how strange life could be. A simple snow shovel, a security camera, and an HOA president's bad judgment had combined to create a story that people were still talking about years later. It had led to real changes in my neighborhood, inspired others to stand up to their own HOA problems, and even resulted in policy discussions about reforming HOA governance in Colorado. The state legislature had actually passed a new law a year after my case, requiring HOAs to follow specific due process procedures before taking any enforcement action against residents. The law was nicknamed the Snow Shovel Bill by some media outlets, though its official name was something boring like the Homeowner Association Accountability Act. Still, knowing that my experience had contributed to actual legal reform was gratifying. I pulled into my driveway that evening and sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house. It was a nice house, nothing fancy but mine. I'd worked hard to afford it, took pride in maintaining it, and enjoyed living there. The fact that I could do so now without fear of some petty tyrant stealing my stuff or harassing me about nonsense violations made it that much better. Inside, I made dinner and settled in for the evening. The Rockies were playing the Dodgers, and I watched the game with a beer, my feet up, completely relaxed. This was what homeownership was supposed to feel like. Safe, comfortable, yours. The snow shovel, still in my garage where it belonged, represented all of that. It was just a tool, a simple piece of metal and plastic designed to move snow, but it had become a symbol of something bigger. Property rights, standing up to bullies, the importance of evidence and documentation, the value of communities supporting each other against unreasonable authority. Winter came around again, as it always does in Colorado. The first snowstorm of the season was forecast for a Tuesday, and I made sure my shovel was ready. When the snow started falling Monday night, I watched it from my window, big fat flakes accumulating steadily. By morning, there would be another foot or more to clear. I went to bed thinking about how different this winter was from that 1 year ago when Patricia had stolen my shovel. Back then, I'd been angry, frustrated, and unsure if anything would come of reporting it. Now, I lived in a neighborhood with a fair and reasonable HOA, surrounded by neighbors who looked out for each other, secure in the knowledge that my property was my property and nobody would take it. The next morning, I grabbed my shovel and got to work, just like I had that fateful day years ago. The snow was heavy and wet, the worst kind for shoveling, but I didn't mind. There was something satisfying about the physical labor, the gradual progress of clearing the driveway, the crisp, cold air in my lungs. When I finished, I leaned the shovel against my garage door, right out in the open where anyone could see it. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty that it would still be there when I came back. That confidence, that security, that was worth more than any $20 shovel could ever cost.